My wife used to joke that I'd never notice if she cheated. She was right, at first. But once I caught on, I played dumb for 6 months, letting her think she was winning. Then I invited everyone to our renewal dinner, where the surprise wasn't a ring, but a projector that showed something that shocked everyone. My name's Daniel, and I'm the kind of man people describe as methodical when they're being polite, or boring when they've had a few drinks. I do data analysis for a risk consultancy firm, actuarial math, forecasting, outcomes. I know how to find patterns and noise, how to see what's missing by watching what stays the same. It's funny. For a living, I predict where systems will fail, companies, markets, disaster zones. But somehow, I didn't see the fault line running through my own marriage until it had already split beneath me. My wife, Claire, used to joke that she could have a whole affair under my nose and I'd never notice. She said it with that laugh of hers, bright, careless, designed to make everyone else laugh with her. And they always did. Even me. Until one day, I didn't. Let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Nicole Sanders from Alabama. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. It was a Wednesday when I noticed the receipt. That's how these things start. Not with lipstick on a collar or whispers in a hallway, but with a $28.50 charge for 2 glasses of red and a Caesar salad at a place I'd never been. It was folded like a secret in the pocket of Claire's gray wool coat, the one she rarely wore unless she wanted to feel sharp, desirable. She told me she'd been out with Melanie from her yoga class. But Melanie doesn't drink. She's allergic to sulfites. I filed that away. Not as proof, just as data point 1. It didn't feel real yet. It felt like a possibility I didn't want to open, like a pop-up warning I kept clicking away from. So I smiled. I kissed her, and I began to pay attention. It wasn't just the receipt. It was her perfume changing. Not the brand. Still the same Tom Ford bottle she'd worn since our honeymoon, but the way it lingered. Heavier. Faintly musky, like it had been reapplied over something else. She stopped asking me how my day had gone. Started leaving the room when she answered calls, turning her back even in our kitchen. But the real clue wasn't any of those things. It was the way she stopped touching me like I was real. Her hand on my arm became a performance, like she was checking a box on some intimacy checklist she'd long since stopped believing in. I would lie in bed beside her, feel the silence between us stretch like an unanswered question. And still, I said nothing. Because there's something no one tells you about betrayal, it doesn't break you all at once. It seeps in, quiet, until it rewires how you breathe. I started to become someone I didn't recognize. I replayed conversations. Checked timestamps. When she went to yoga, I checked our shared car's GPS history and saw a pattern forming. A house on Archer Lane. Always on Wednesdays. I copied the address into a file I named Vacation Ideas. I laughed while I typed it. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I might have driven there and pounded on the door like some character in a bad movie. But I didn't want to be that man. I wanted to be the man who knew. The first time she came home late and didn't kiss me hello, I stood in the kitchen with my coffee going cold and asked her how class was. She told me they'd focused on hips. Lots of deep stretching, she added, smiling as she pulled off her jacket. I looked at her and said nothing. I noted the smudge of unfamiliar foundation on her collar, one shade darker than her own. I watched as she opened a bottle of wine she used to save for special occasions. And I realized then, she wasn't just cheating on me. She was experimenting with who she could become now that I'd stopped watching. Or so she thought. But I was watching. Closely. Quietly. Every lie she told became a thread I wove into something bigger. A pattern. A timeline. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask for explanations I already knew would be lies. Because I realized something even darker than her betrayal. I didn't want her to stop. Not yet. I wanted to see how far she'd go. I wanted to see what she'd do if she believed she was winning. That's the part no one understands about revenge. It doesn't grow in rage. It grows in the space where trust used to live. And once it starts, it's patient. We went to dinner with her friends the following Friday. One of them made that joke again about Claire being so gorgeous she could have 5 affairs and I'd be none the wiser. Everyone laughed. Claire threw her head back and gave that theatrical wink. He's too sweet. Wouldn't suspect a thing. I raised my glass and toasted to being oblivious. But I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I saw her mask slip for half a second. Just long enough to tell me she knew exactly what she was doing. And she thought I'd never be man enough to do anything about it. That night, while she showered, I opened my laptop and started a folder called June 10th. I didn't know yet what that date would become, but I knew I needed an anchor. A moment in the future that would be mine. That's when I made the decision, not to leave, not to yell, but to wait. 6 months. Long enough for her to think she'd won. Long enough for the truth to become undeniable. And then, I'd give her a night she'd never forget. A night she would remember every time she tried to laugh at another man again. I shut the laptop, listened to the water running behind the bathroom door, and I whispered, "Keep going." People assume betrayal hits you like a car crash, loud, instant, all at once. But for me, it was slower, more like mold behind a wall. I didn't scream or pack a bag. I didn't demand names or explanations. I just stepped back, quietly, surgically. I started sleeping in the guest room the night Claire said she was too tired for a movie we'd been planning all week. Her voice was flat, distracted. She kept glancing at her phone, thumb twitching like she couldn't wait to respond. I told her it was fine, that I had a late report due. She nodded too quickly, already turning away, and in that moment I realized something I hadn't admitted until then. I wasn't sleeping next to my wife anymore. I was sleeping next to someone playing a role. So I moved into the guest room, and she didn't ask why. The first night in that cold, unfamiliar bed, I lay awake listening to the sound of her laughter from the other side of the house. It wasn't loud, but it had that sharp, breathy quality she used when she was trying to impress someone. She said she was watching a stand-up special, but I knew that laugh. It was her flirty laugh. The one she used to give to bartenders before she realized I noticed. I stared at the ceiling and let the silence fill my throat until it felt like I was drowning in it. The sheets smelled like dust and lavender, and for the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own home. She didn't come to check on me, didn't ask if I was okay. That was the night I stopped hoping she'd stop. The days blurred. I became deliberate in my distance, present but unreachable. I ate dinner at different times, claimed I had client calls that ran late, invented a new fitness routine I never actually followed. She didn't question any of it. If anything, she seemed relieved. I could feel her relax around me, like a prisoner whose guard had gone blind. But that was the trick, wasn't it? I wasn't blind. I was watching her with the detachment of someone auditing a failed system. And what I saw only confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Claire wasn't just cheating on me. She was rehearsing a new life, one she thought she could slip into without consequence. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was the audience she assumed had left the theater. Around that time, I started therapy. Not because I needed someone to fix me, no one can fix what betrayal does, but because I needed a place to say things I couldn't put anywhere else. My therapist, a woman named Mara with tired eyes and a voice like warm concrete, asked me why I hadn't confronted Claire. I told her I wasn't ready, that I needed more time to process. That wasn't the truth, of course. The truth was uglier. I wasn't confronting her because I didn't want to stop the unraveling. I wanted to watch it fall apart in slow motion. I wanted to understand exactly who she was when she thought no one was looking. And that meant I had to keep pretending I was asleep while she danced across a burning bridge. I started saving things. Digital breadcrumbs. Uber receipts she didn't know I could see through our shared account. Instagram photos with timestamps that didn't match the stories she told. A voicemail she left for Melanie that started with "Hey babe" and ended with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. I didn't open everything right away. I didn't need to. The point wasn't proof. The point was weight. I was building something, not a case, but a feeling. Something I could hold in my chest when the time came. Something sharp enough to cut through the years we'd wasted. That was when the idea came to me. Not just to leave, not just to expose her, but to do it in a way that echoed. I wanted it to reverberate through every smug little joke she'd ever made at my expense. And yet, I still played my part. I still brought her coffee in the mornings, sometimes even kissed the top of her head. She'd smile, half-hearted, distracted, always with that phone not too far from her hand. I'd ask how her day looked, and she'd lie with such fluid grace I started to admire it. Busy. Yoga, then maybe grabbing lunch with the girls. I'd nod. Sounds nice. But inside, I was noting the shift in her voice, the subtle uptick when she mentioned places I knew she wasn't going. I wasn't hurt anymore, not in the way people expect. I was studying her. Every word, every gesture. I wasn't her husband now. I was her historian. The guest room became my sanctuary. I cleaned it obsessively, set up a small desk, brought in my old laptop, the one she didn't know the password to. I told her I needed a quiet place to work, and she bought it. Maybe because she wanted to. Maybe because it was easier than asking real questions. I started staying up late, writing in a journal she never saw, drafting timelines, planning scenarios. Not fantasies of confrontation, but choreography. I wasn't just going to catch her. I was going to catch her off guard. I imagined the look in her eyes when she realized I'd known all along. Not angry. Not afraid. Just small. Exposed. That's what I wanted. Not vengeance. Not violence. Just clarity. Just the truth in the open, like broken glass on a white table. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, she came to the doorway of the guest room. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, wearing the oversized t-shirt I used to love on her. "You okay?" she asked, like it was an afterthought. I looked at her through the mirror and said, "Yeah, just tired." She nodded. Didn't step closer. Didn't try. Just said, "Okay. Night," and walked away. I stood there for a long time after she left, toothbrush still in my hand, watching the spot she'd just been. And I thought, she's already gone. I just haven't told her yet. The night I bought the projector, Claire was in the living room scrolling through her phone, her face lit blue and impassive like a stranger on a train. She didn't ask why I suddenly wanted one. Just gave a distracted cool and returned to whatever message thread kept her so loyal to someone else's attention. I told her it was for a future presentation, something for work. That wasn't a lie. Not exactly. I was preparing a presentation, just not for any client. I was curating evidence, building a story. And like every good analyst, I wasn't just looking for data, I was constructing a narrative that would be impossible to deny. A truth that could be played back, moment by moment, with timestamps and quiet devastation. I didn't want drama. I wanted precision. I wanted silence that landed like a hammer. I spent the next few weeks living like two men. The first was the one she saw, a distracted husband trying to reignite his focus, a man spending late nights on spreadsheets and mock decks, drinking too much coffee and pretending to believe the lie of peace. The second was the man she didn't see. The one reviewing phone records and mapping patterns, who had started memorizing legal phrases from our prenup as if they were prayers. Section 14b had become my gospel. Any documented infidelity voided the post-divorce spousal support clause. Not just infidelity, documented, quantified, irrefutable. I began organizing my file folder with the kind of care usually reserved for family heirlooms. Photos, text screenshots, credit card statements with overlapping timestamps. I didn't even open most of it right away. It was enough to have it. Like a fire escape she didn't know existed. Claire kept drifting further, too secure in her illusion to notice the tightening rope. She'd walk into the house with perfume still clinging to her skin in places I used to kiss, wearing smiles that never quite reached her eyes anymore. She started mentioning a guy named Derek, casually, like someone at the gym or a mutual friend of a friend. I watched the name float through her sentences like a test balloon, subtle, weightless. I never asked questions. I knew who he was. He lived on Archer Lane, owned a dog, had a thing for motorcycle jackets and house music. I knew what Claire looked like from his ring cam at 11:32 p.m. every Wednesday for the past 7 weeks. I knew she sometimes left wearing one hoodie and came home in another. And most importantly, I knew she still thought I was blind. At therapy, Mara asked me what I was hoping to accomplish by staying. I didn't say revenge. I said clarity. That was the word I kept using. It felt cleaner than anger, more intellectual. But the truth was, clarity was just the lens I used to focus the fire. I didn't want her to suffer. I wanted her to see. I wanted her to sit across from everyone she thought she'd fooled and watch the illusion collapse. I wanted to take her moment of triumph and twist it in her hands until she no longer recognized what she'd built. That was when I started planning the dinner. I called it a renewal celebration. Said it was our way of reconnecting after a rough patch. Claire was delighted. "This is really sweet, babe," she said. "You've been so distant lately. It's good to see you trying again." I kissed her cheek and told her she deserved it. That, too, wasn't a lie. She deserved exactly what was coming. There's something beautiful about planning a clean betrayal. It forces you to see how much cruelty can exist inside kindness. I chose the restaurant carefully, private, intimate, nostalgic. The same place we'd gone to after our engagement party. I told the manager I wanted a projector set up, said I'd be showing a slideshow of our favorite memories. "That sounds amazing," he said. "We love romantic stuff like that." I smiled, signed the contract, and made sure the lighting could dim at a remote signal. I created the slideshow at night, after Claire had gone to bed, piecing together her infidelity like a slow, silent requiem. A GPS screenshot here. A time-stamped photo there. Nothing graphic. No nudity. Just patterns. Dates. Truth rendered in the clean, cold syntax of reality. By the time I finished, it ran 8 minutes and 14 seconds. I watched it 10 times and never blinked. Claire's friends were easy to manipulate. I called them one by one and told them the dinner was a surprise. "She's been through a lot," I said, "and I want her to know she's still loved." They cooed. They gushed. One of them cried. I said I was thinking of renewing our vows in front of everyone. That sealed it. "You're such a good guy, Daniel." I hung up the phone each time with a calm I couldn't explain. It felt like preparing a eulogy for a body that hadn't realized it was dead yet. I even invited her parents. I said I wanted to make amends. That was a particularly twisted pleasure, knowing they'd watch what she'd become and realize they didn't know her at all. One afternoon, Claire walked in while I was researching how prenup enforcement is handled in open proceedings. I had quickly minimized the window, but she didn't even glance at my screen. She was texting. She was always texting. "I was thinking we should write our own vows," she said, absently. "You know, make it more personal?" I looked up, nodded. "Definitely." She smiled at me like we were 30 again and still pretending we hadn't broken each other. I nodded again, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she turned and walked away, and I saw a small bite mark on the back of her shoulder, fresh, half hidden under her tank top. Not mine. I stared at it like a signature. A signed confession from the man she thought was invisible. I made 2 copies of the enforcement documents, had them notarized and sealed. One would be handed to her during dessert, after the slideshow. The other would be filed first thing the next morning. There'd be no screaming, no accusations. Just her, surrounded by family and friends, watching the story she thought she'd buried unfold in front of her. I didn't care if she denied it. That's the beauty of evidence. It doesn't argue. It just is. The projector would say everything I wouldn't. I started practicing how I'd sit, how I'd watch her, how I wouldn't flinch. And I knew, as clearly as I knew my own name, that the moment she realized the entire evening had been a performance, she'd understand the one thing I'd never said out loud. I wasn't trying to win her back. I was trying to let her lose everything in front of everyone who mattered. The night began with candles. Too many. Claire loved drama in small doses, just enough to make her feel like the main character without having to bleed for the plot. I told the restaurant I wanted the lighting soft, romantic, almost dreamlike. The staff did it perfectly. Warmth glowed off every glass, every fork. Our names in cursive on the menu. A bottle of wine we'd shared the night we got engaged, and a small bouquet of white tulips, her favorite, waiting at her seat. She touched them when we arrived, fingers gentle, smile slow, and said, "You remembered." I nodded, murmured something soft. She didn't know I remembered everything, not just the flowers. I remembered the timeline, the lies, the doorbell camera videos. And now I would remember this moment too, because I had orchestrated it down to the breath. I could feel her watching me as we walked in, scanning my face for signs. She'd worn ivory. Not quite a dress, not quite casual. Just enough to suggest she still believed in US, or at least wanted others to. Her heels clicked with quiet confidence as we passed tables filled with people we both knew. Friends, colleagues, her sister, her parents. Some waved. Some rose for hugs. I smiled at everyone, shook hands, thanked them for coming. My suit was tailored. My voice was even. Not one person could tell the difference between the man I used to be and the one I'd become. That's the beauty of emotional rehearsal. You wear the mask so long it starts to look like your face. Claire didn't realize the man pulling her chair out wasn't her husband anymore. He was something else. He was the reckoning she'd never prepared for. The courses came in pairs. Appetizers, then entrees. Each one timed. I barely touched mine. Claire did, talking between bites, joking about how bad she'd been at keeping her nails done for this dinner, teasing me about the time I cried at our wedding. Her laughter carried through the room like sugar glass, pretty, fragile, hollow. I watched her like someone watching a magician they've already figured out. You can admire the performance, even as you know the trick. She thought this was a renewal, a soft reset after months of distance. And in a way, she wasn't wrong. It was a renewal, just not of vows. Of perspective. Of truth. This was the moment the curtain would lift, and she'd see the stage for what it really was. A courtroom dressed in candlelight. Right before dessert, I stood. The projector was already set up behind the curtain near the back wall, disguised as part of the decor. I tapped my glass once. Just once. Not too loud. Enough to turn heads. Claire smiled at me, eyes wide and expectant, maybe even touched. She thought this was the speech. The one where I'd talk about rediscovery, second chances, loving someone through the storm. I kept my voice low, intimate. Thank you all for coming. Tonight's about something I think we often forget to honor, not just love, but truth. I paused. Claire reached out and brushed my wrist. I turned and handed her a gift box, small, wrapped in navy paper, tied with twine. This is for you, I said. Open it before dessert. She smiled, untied the bow. Inside was a single envelope and a folded note that read, for better, for worse. But not for this. She frowned. Looked up. What is this? I didn't answer. I walked to the back and pressed the button. The lights dimmed. The projector hummed softly to life, casting its first image across the far wall. It was simple. A calendar with dates marked in red, every Wednesday for the past 5 months. Then photos. Claire entering a house on Archer Lane. Claire leaving hours later, once in a hoodie too large for her frame. A screenshot of a text. Last night was everything. A matching timestamp from her Uber receipt. A video, blurry but undeniable, of her kissing a man in a leather jacket outside his apartment. Claire gasped. So did someone else, her sister maybe. A fork hit the floor. I didn't move. Claire stood suddenly. Daniel, what is this? Her voice cracked like she was the victim. I still said nothing. The slideshow played on. 8 minutes and 14 seconds of carefully ordered betrayal. No sound. Just images. Cold, factual, irrefutable. When it ended, the room was silent in a way I've never experienced before. No one moved. No one spoke. Claire's mouth was open, but her eyes were what got me. Wide, searching, disbelieving. Not because she didn't know what she was seeing, but because she realized, too late, that I'd seen it all. That I'd known. That the man who had slept beside her in silence had been documenting her unraveling like a historian of decay. A server approached then, placing a tray in front of her. On it, instead of dessert, were the prenup enforcement papers. Signed. Sealed. Irrevocable. Her hands trembled. You're doing this here? She whispered, but it wasn't anger I heard. It was fear. Fear of losing the illusion. Fear of having the mask removed in front of everyone. I finally spoke. You made jokes for years about how I'd never notice. You were right. I didn't, at first. But I learned. And I watched. And now I'm done. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stepped back and watched her world contract. She looked around, desperate, waiting for someone to defend her. No one did. Her father stood up. Then her mother. They left first, faces pale, silent. Claire reached for me. I stepped away. You made your choice, I said. Tonight's just the invoice. She sank back into her chair, the papers still unopened in front of her. Someone from our friend group started to clap, unsure, awkward, maybe out of habit. I didn't stop them. Claire buried her face in her hands. The lights came back on. The music returned. And I walked out into the night without a single backward glance. The text started before I'd even made it home. First one, then 4 more. I didn't know you were so cruel. You blindsided me. We should have talked first. This isn't who you are. You really wanted to humiliate me? I read them in silence, sitting in the car with the engine off, watching the reflection of the porch light stretch across the windshield. There was no apology, no accountability, just panic wrapped in performance. I didn't respond. I wasn't angry. Not in the way people expect. What I felt was something colder, quieter, more surgical. Not satisfaction, but stillness. Like the final page of a book you've been dreading to finish, only to realize you stopped caring about the ending a long time ago. The dinner hadn't broken her. Not really. It had revealed her. And now she was scrambling to rewrite the story. But I wasn't in it anymore. Claire showed up the next morning. She didn't knock, just let herself in using the key she still had. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour earlier. She wore the same dress from the night before, only now it hung limp and creased, her makeup smudged like a mask dissolving in real time. She didn't speak at first, just stood in the doorway like someone surveying a crime scene. You could have told me, she said eventually, voice thin, as if the betrayal had been mine. You could have just talked to me, Daniel. I looked at her, really looked, and it hit me. She still didn't get it. She still believed the silence I'd kept was weakness. She didn't understand it was preparation. That I hadn't confronted her because I wasn't looking for redemption. I was building an ending. I did talk to you, I said, voice level. I just stopped using words. She flinched, sat across from me, hands folded like she was interviewing for a role she didn't remember abandoning. You planned all that? The slideshow? The papers? In front of everyone? I nodded once. And you don't see how that makes you the villain now? I didn't answer, because that was the final piece of her delusion. That if she could just flip the narrative fast enough, loud enough, she could recast herself as the wounded one. But there's no moral high ground when you're standing on the ruins you lit yourself. I didn't lie, I said. You did. Repeatedly. For months. This is the natural consequence of your own arithmetic. She stared at me, eyes wet but dry at the same time, like she'd cried all night but hadn't let a single tear fall for the right reason. She tried a softer angle. I felt neglected. You were distant. You always buried yourself in work. I didn't mean for things to happen the way they did. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Affairs are rarely about sex. They're about validation, power, escape. She hadn't fallen into anything. She'd stepped into it with her eyes open, thinking she'd always have time to turn back. I took another sip of my coffee, cold now, bitter. You didn't mean for it to happen the way it did, I said, but you meant for it to happen. She looked down. Silence stretched. When she spoke again, her voice was hoarse. So that's it? You're just done. I nodded. I was done the day I moved into the guest room. Last night was just the courtesy of making it public. She stood then, slower this time, like the weight of what I'd said had finally settled into her bones. You won't come back from this clean either, you know, she said. People are going to think you're vindictive. That you humiliated me. I met her eyes and said something I hadn't planned until the moment it left my mouth. Good. Let them. That was the truth of it. I wasn't trying to come out looking like the hero. I didn't need redemption or applause. I just needed the silence between us to mean something again. Not absence. Not defeat. Just peace. The kind that only exists once the lie is burned down and there's nothing left to explain. She left without another word. The door shut behind her like a soft collapse. I didn't follow. I sat there until the shadows shifted across the floor, until the coffee cup left a ring on the wood I didn't bother to wipe away. That's the thing about endings. They're quiet. No fireworks. No crescendo. Just one breath, and then the next without the weight of someone else's deception riding shotgun in your lungs. The text slowed after that. To that night. I wish you'd tried harder. I never stopped loving you. I didn't answer either. Not because I didn't have thoughts, but because I knew now that answering would only reopen a door I'd already locked from the inside. Love without trust is just performance art. I was done being in the audience. Let her monologue to herself now. Word got out. As it always does. Some people messaged me privately. I had no idea. That was brutal, but damn. She always acted like she was too clever for her own good. But I didn't chase vindication. I didn't argue with anyone. I let the truth do what truth always does. It just sat there, undeniable, unmoving. Claire tried spinning her version for a while, claiming I was emotionally distant, maybe even controlling. She leaned into victimhood like it was a lifeboat. But the slideshow had already done the talking. And when people have seen proof, words don't land the same. The story had already been told, and no amount of posturing could erase what was projected on that wall. One night, maybe 2 weeks later, I got a message from her sister. She's not doing well. I stared at it for a long time. Typed, "That's unfortunate." Deleted it. Typed again, "I hope she finds peace." Deleted that too. And finally just turned off my phone. Because it wasn't my job to worry about her anymore. She was no longer my wife. She was the consequence of her own unchecked appetite. And I wasn't angry. I wasn't even cold. I was free. I didn't change everything all at once. That's not how it works. People expect grand exits, dramatic haircuts, international flights. But real rebirth isn't loud. It's quiet. Incomplete. It happens in the little things. Like how I stopped sleeping with my phone in the room, or how I no longer counted Claire's silences like threats. The day after she left, I threw out the projector. Not because I regretted using it. I didn't. But because I didn't want to become the man who rewatched his own vengeance. I didn't want my freedom to live in a loop. I wanted it to be forward-facing, present tense. So I sat on the floor, unscrewed the legs, and dropped it in the bin like a chapter that didn't need a sequel. It made a dull clatter. That was the last sound Claire ever made in my home. I sold the house 3 weeks later. Not because it held too many memories, I could stomach those, but because it felt like a stage I no longer belonged on. Every corner reminded me of things said and unsaid, of performances we both kept up long after the audience had left. I found a small apartment downtown. Nothing extravagant. 1 bedroom, warm light, a sliver of skyline. There was a coffee shop beneath it where the barista didn't ask questions, just memorized my order. Black, no sugar. That's what I wanted most, neutrality. A place where no one knew who I had been or what I had done. Just a man with a coffee and hands that no longer shook in the mornings. I took up pottery. Not seriously, just enough to feel clay move beneath my fingers, to shape something without a script. There was something calming about the wheel, the way it demanded both control and surrender. If you pressed too hard, it collapsed. Too light, and it warped. It reminded me of marriage in ways I didn't expect. Except this time, I was shaping something for myself, and it didn't need to impress anyone. I made small bowls and ugly mugs, gave them to strangers, left one outside the barista's station with a note that just said, "Thank you." I didn't want recognition. I wanted grace. And I was learning to accept that sometimes, peace isn't something you claim. It's something you stop running from. Claire's name still came up sometimes. A mutual friend mentioned she'd moved out of state. Started over. She was working for a nonprofit, apparently. Still posting photos of herself smiling in golden hour light, holding wine glasses she never finished. In one picture, she wore a necklace I'd given her 6 anniversaries ago. I looked at it for a long time. Not with longing, but with curiosity. How many parts of her life had she kept propped up just enough to pass as whole? I didn't judge it. Some people rebuild using pieces they never truly owned. But I also didn't envy her. Because no matter how curated her life appeared now, she would always remember the night the projector hummed to life and what it revealed. She emailed me once. Short. Subject line. Closure. Body. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I'm sorry for what I did. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed to say that. You didn't deserve it. I hope you're okay. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was irrelevance. A closed loop. For years, I would have done anything to hear those words. But when they finally arrived, they felt like flowers left on the grave of a version of me that no longer existed. I wished her well, in my mind, not in writing, and moved on. That's when I knew it was really over. Not just the marriage, but the need to make her understand. One rainy Thursday, I ran into someone who had been at the dinner. A guy from Claire's work circle. He hesitated before speaking, as if he didn't know which version of me he was addressing. That night, he started trailing off. I waited. That was something. Brave, I guess, but brutal. I nodded, not offering anything. He looked uncomfortable. Would you do it the same way again? He finally asked. I thought about that, really thought. No, I said. I'd do it quieter. He blinked. Quieter. Yeah, not because she didn't deserve it, but because silence would have hit harder. He didn't know what to say. People rarely do when you admit peace means walking away before the applause. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that dinner table. Not Claire's face, hers faded quickly, but the candlelight, the flicker of recognition in people's eyes. The way the air thickened as the slideshow played. It doesn't haunt me. It reminds me of how close I came to disappearing inside someone else's story, and how, in the end, I rewrote my own, not with fury, but with finality. That's what people get wrong about revenge. They think it ends when the other person breaks, but it really ends when you stop needing them to. That's the freedom. That's the win. I don't wear a ring anymore. Haven't for months. But I keep it in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a relic, a symbol, a reminder of who I was and who I refused to remain. Sometimes I open that drawer and just look at it, not with sadness, with stillness, like a former prisoner walking past the cell that once held them, knowing they have the key and no need to use it ever again. If this story hits something deep, if you've ever held your silence while someone thought they were getting away with everything, then you're exactly who I told this for. Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, but dig into the quiet power of reclaiming your life. I tell the kind of truths people live through but rarely say out loud. Stick around, your story might be next. See you soon in the next one.